Assalamualaikum everyone. My name is Maliha and I'm a licensed therapist who loves sharing information about mental health. Ramadan is around the corner, and while it comes with its own set of blessings and challenges, this time can be especially difficult for Muslims who are struggling with eating disorders. Today I invited Najiha Khan, who's a therapist that specializes in working with eating disorders, so that she can shed some light on this topic. Thank you so much for joining us, Najiha.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, I'm so excited to talk about this topic because I feel like it's going to be very beneficial for a lot of people. One of the first things I kind of wanted to start off with was talking a little bit about the prevalence of eating disorders in the Muslim community.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that there's just not a lot of research at all on Muslims and mental health in general in Muslim communities, but eating disorders especially, there's not a lot of numbers in the US on what that looks like. However, there's no reason to believe that it isn't just as prevalent, if not more prevalent, as compared to the general population. So with the general population, the numbers vary depending on the type of eating disorder. It could be anywhere from 1 to 10% of people that are living with an eating disorder. There is research that suggests that minorities tend to have higher rates of eating disorders, and especially racial and ethnic minorities. And so, we can safely assume that a lot of Muslims might be experiencing eating disorders at higher rate. The numbers do show that minorities tend to be underdiagnosed with eating disorders. So clinicians, therapists, people just aren't as likely to notice these behaviors in people who are minorities. And so the numbers, again, might be high in Muslim communities, but it might just be getting missed.
There was actually a study done in the UAE that showed that teen girls had higher levels, actually twice the number of cases of anorexia than teen girls in Britain. What are some of the common misconceptions that Muslims have about eating disorders?
The biggest misconception might be that it doesn't even exist in our communities. People tend to think that, if you have a good relationship with God, then you're going to be able to feed yourself and to just not have these struggles. And obviously that's not true, right? Those things are not correlated. And another big misconception is that eating disorders only happen to women, or that they only happen to teenagers. And that's also not true. We have people who have a lifetime of eating disorders that they're dealing with. We have men who have eating disorders, and that's way more common than we might think. Another one is that I think because a lot of Muslims come from more collectivistic cultures here in the US, they might think that we wouldn't have eating disorders because we live in these family groups that would protect us from that, and that people would be able to pick up on it if you have an eating disorder. And that's also not true, because eating disorders can very easily be hidden. They can very easily fly under the radar. A lot of people, they don't lose an immense amount of weight as you might think. They might just be around their regular weight. So you wouldn't be able to see that on somebody. And also just diet culture, that somebody who is restricting their food intake, who is over exercising, that those things are celebrated. So, and that's really unfortunate.
They associate eating disorders with being very thin or looking a certain way. And so it can go under the radar when we don't know what to kind of look out for.
Right. And yes. And there's several different ways to have an eating disorder. There's people who might be experiencing anorexia. There's people who might be experiencing bulimia. And folks with bulimia, again, their weight may not fluctuate that much. There may not be any drastic changes. They might look the same as you've always seen them, even though there's a lot of changes going on internally in their body due to the purging, binging cycles that they're in. And then there's folks with binge eating disorder who might be experiencing weight gain or no weight gain. Everyone's bodies are so different. And then there's also ARFID, which is avoidant restricted food intake disorder. Yep. And with that, it's not even about body image. Folks with ARFID are not refraining from eating because they want to lose weight, but it's something out of their control. And so sometimes those two things might get conflated, that, oh, if you're not eating, then you must not be happy with your body, which is not always true either. Also, I think helpful to look at what influences your loved one is a part of. So like athlete culture, sport culture, eating disorders are highly prevalent there, just because it's the environment that they're in, right? Over exercising, being told what they should or shouldn't eat, how much they should weigh. And so I think that's also a misconception that if someone is over exercising and they're an athlete, then it's okay. But that's not necessarily true.
I've noticed this happening in the Desi Brown community, that conversations surrounding weight, especially for women, is something that's discussed quite a lot, right? And when
Yes.
conversations, those can be very detrimental for someone who is recovering from an eating disorder or experiencing that. But it's really unfortunate that although those conversations are so prevalent, the conversations surrounding recovery and healthy eating habits and all of that, that's something that's not talked about at all.
You really hit the nail on the head. I think that in our cultures, like, people almost feel like they have a right to your body, and they can just make these comments about you and how you're looking these days. And, oh, you look like you haven't been eating much. Like, that's such a common thing for us, without realizing that that's not helping that individual. It might actually be really harming them.
What are some of the challenges that Muslims face in Ramadan when they're struggling with eating disorders?
A lot of cultural practices during Ramadan can really trigger the same eating disorder behaviors that people are trying to heal from. So a good example of that is when, like, you're expected to not eat anything all day, and then come sunset, most of us have a whole feast in front of us that we're expected to eat. And for folks who are trying to heal from binging behaviors or from restricting, purging cycles, that can really light up that part of themselves that they're trying to heal from, because it just puts their brain back in that spot that they're trying to grow from. Part of healing from disordered eating is to get back in touch with the natural cues your body gives you for hunger and fullness. And in Ramadan, you're expected to kind of ignore those cues and just not eat and not listen to your body, not listen to your stomach when it grumbles. And so that can also kind of set somebody back and throw their healing off course. That offset in somebody's schedule can throw off their healing as well. And I think, one big one that we don't talk about enough is just the guilt that people feel for not engaging in this religious obligation. That's just a very unique thing that people with eating disorders deal with in Ramadan, that everyone around them is fasting and they can't participate in it, not because they don't necessarily want to, but because of an illness that they can't even always verbalize to the people around them. When we're trying to help people to eat again after a period of restricting themselves, we want them to get back on a schedule that they can regularly eat and monitor their eating. And it's, again, really hard to do that in Ramadan when you don't really have an eating schedule. Most people will just not eat when the sun's out and then eat when the sun's down. And there's no real schedule to that. And that can make it really tricky.
So how does someone decide if fasting in Ramadan is the right thing for them when they're in recovery?
Talk to your recovery team. So if, people with eating disorders will probably have a therapist, a dietitian, a doctor. They'll have all kinds of people on their team. So, pick one of them, whoever you feel like you can have this conversation with, and talk to them about this. When you're in the midst of your own eating disorder, you might miss certain things. You might not know the full context of what's going on around you. So it can just be helpful to get a second opinion, a professional opinion on what can be healthy for you. Some questions that they might ask you to help you figure it out is, are you at your goal weight yet? If you're not yet at your goal weight, then they may not want you to fast yet. They may want to get a feel for what your coping skills are like. So if you're planning on fasting during Ramadan, you might get triggered by the people around you. You might get activated. And so it's going to be really important to be able to cope with those negative emotions that will come up. And so just making sure that your coping skills are set before Ramadan starts will be important. If you've been through an eating disorder, it will be difficult to separate that part of yourself that used to fast for other reasons from fasting for God. And so if there's a part of you that's feeling like you're not going to be able to separate those things, then it might be a good idea to take a step back.
How can friends and family help their loved ones when they're going through recovery?
So I think, Maliha, you mentioned it really well earlier when you said, like, just how we comment on other people's weight and bodies. So really, to refrain from doing that, it could really trigger someone, even if you think you're helping. But even a comment that you think is harmless, like, oh, looks like you've put on a little bit of weight, or, you look good, you lost weight.
Right.
All those things can be really harmful for people. And one thing people also don't think about, a much more insidious way that this happens, is commenting on your own weight and your own body. So saying things like, I need to get back in shape. I don't want to eat eat this cookie or something because it's
Right.
unhealthy. So refraining from commenting on yourself is also really important. You know, you may think that it's just, if I'm just talking about myself, like how can that person be impacted by it? But it is getting internalized for them. So not asking invasive questions. So like, I noticed you were not fasting today, or you know, how come you're eating that much? Or asking these questions can be really hurtful and just puts that person in a painful place that they're trying to heal from. So don't force conversations onto people, but be there for them when they are ready to talk about it.
My final question for you was, what are some resources that people can utilize? And I'll go ahead and I'll link that information in the description box for the video so that people can keep coming back to it if they need to.
The National Eating Disorder Association crisis text line is really a great resource to use. I think you can just text NEDA to 741-741. So the Alliance for Eating Disorders, there's the Eating Recovery Center, ERC, that does great work, and they have locations in Texas. And then for people who want to educate themselves, there's also something called ED Catalog. You can find a lot of different books online that are really great for just body image, disordered eating, the social justice impacts of eating disorder. And yeah, there's a lot of great resources on there as well.
That's awesome. I think that could be so helpful for a lot of family members too, because I feel like in our community, especially information about mental illness or eating disorders, it's just not talked about. So people don't even know where to start. And if they can have somewhere to go to where they can learn about, hey, how do I help my loved one, you know, cope with what they're going through, it could be something that's very helpful. I wanted to say thank you so much for doing this video with me. I think it's going to be so helpful for a lot of people who are struggling with an eating disorder, or loved ones who don't even know kind of where to start with this whole process. So I'm really happy that you were able to make time and join me today.
Yes, thank you. This was really lovely. Thanks for having me.
If you found this information to be helpful, make sure to share this video, like it, and subscribe to my channel so that you can learn more information about mental health. Don't forget to share this video on your social media platforms so that more people can learn and benefit. Ramadan Mubarak, and I'll see you in the next one.